Okay, it's time again for the Press Box podcast. Today it's episode number 92, our college football recap of week 2. Lots of great games in college football in week 2. It was kind of the let's play a team from the FCS weekend. Most of the teams played teams that, probably not very highly ranked, probably well below them as far as the pecking order. But still, we saw a little bit of a flushing out in the rankings. We started to see some teams that were better, some teams that we thought were good that were not as good, and then some surprises as well. So Nathan and I are going to discuss that. Remember to check us out at PressBoxPod at our Twitter account. Go to our YouTube page, the PressBox Podcast, for a lot of great content that Nathan has put up there. And, of course, our Instagram page at PressBoxPod. Hey, check us out. Ask us if you need some help on your fantasy team. We can do that as we've done so last week. So lots of great things to talk about in college football as the season begins to heat up. And what's better than seeing full stadiums in college football? So without further ado, it's time for episode number 92 of the Press Box Podcast. Okay, so welcome back to the Press Box Podcast. I'm your co-host, Ralph Miranda. I'll be joined by my producer, Nathan Miranda. This is episode number 92, if you're counting at home. Today, we're going to recap the week 2 of college football. Last week was week 2. Last week, Nathan and I recapped the first week, which lots of good games on opening week. Week 2, as I mentioned last week, tends to be, I don't want to say patsy, but more of the top-ranked teams playing the Division I AA or FCS teams, playing easier games to bring into their stadium. There was a lot of that going on last week. There were a few really good games, but mostly it was those types of games. But before we get started, I want to remind everybody to go to our Twitter account at PressBoxPod. Our YouTube channel, the Press Box Podcast, where Nathan puts up the episodes and as well as certain neat clips from each episode. And, of course, our Instagram page, which is at Press Box Pod as well. We'd like to have more interaction from you. We'd love to hear from you. We provide fantasy updates. We do all sorts of things for our listeners and our subscribers. So make sure you do that as quick as you can. I'm going to start, Nathan, by going over the top 25. Is that okay with you?
Yeah.
Okay, let's do that first, and then we'll talk a little bit about some of the changes that have come from that. Right now, of course, Alabama is number 1. Georgia is number 2, which they've been since they beat Clemson opening week. Oklahoma has moved up to number 3. They beat one of those FCS type teams 76-0 last Saturday. Oregon moved up to number 4 from number 12. That was the biggest jump of the week since Oregon upset Ohio State in Columbus. Not only was that a tremendous upset, Ohio State was ranked number 3 at the time, but it was also the first time in 9 tries that Oregon had beaten Ohio State. So that was a huge win for the Oregon Ducks. Iowa moved up to number 5 with their win over previously number 9 Iowa State. Clemson held at number 6. They crushed South Carolina State last Saturday. Texas A&M kind of hung right around number 7. They struggled a little bit with Colorado, had to score a very late touchdown to win that one. So they kind of waffled around at number 7. Cincinnati dropped the spot. They struggled early on with Murray State, but then turned it on in the second half to win. So they're number 8. Ohio State dropped to number 9. They're 1-1 now. Penn State is number 10. Penn State is 2-0. They have a big game coming up Saturday with Auburn. That'll be one of the bigger games of the weekend. Florida is number 11. Now, that's going to be an interesting spot for Florida because guess who they get Saturday? They get number 1 ranked Alabama. So that's going to be another marquee game, this Saturday, the SEC. Notre Dame dropped from number, I believe, 8 or 9 to number 12. A very warranted drop. In fact, they probably could have dropped further than that. They struggled to beat Toledo. In fact, had to drive 75 yards in 3 plays with about 1:26 left to score the go-ahead touchdown. Many people believe, and if you look at the stats, that Toledo pretty much outplayed Notre Dame in that game. Notre Dame was fortunate to come away with the victory to remain at 2-0. UCLA is number 13. They are 2-0. They're getting better. Iowa State dropped to number 14 after their loss to Iowa. Virginia Tech is 15. Coastal Carolina with a big win over Kansas, which, again, Kansas not a very good team, but still an FBS Power 5 conference team. Ole Miss is 17. Wisconsin is 18. They had a big win over Eastern Michigan. Of course, they did lose opening week to Penn State. Arizona State's 19, and Arkansas is 20. We'll just kind of leave it at that. Arkansas had a big win over Texas, a blowout win over Texas, which gave them the advantage there. So, Nathan, as I reviewed that top 20 to you, anything stand out to you?
Well, the Ohio State loss, I'm not big on a lot of these. I mean, I don't know a whole lot about a lot of these college teams, including Oregon, but
right.
That's one that stood out to me when I saw that come across the scoreboard the other last Saturday. I figured Ohio State would go undefeated. Notre Dame obviously surprised me. I was checking in. We didn't watch that game. I think it was on Peacock exclusively, I believe. But checking in on that score over and over, I thought they were going to lose. So I'm surprised they pulled it out there at the end, and that was good to see. Waking up on Sunday morning to see that. Texas, big surprise. Are they? Did they move to the SEC this year? Or are they going to move next year?
No. In fact, I think they're not going to move. I think until 2025. So it's going to be a while.
But they just announced that that was going to happen recently. Right?
Yes. Yeah. Them in Oklahoma.
Right. Well, they're starting to look. I mean, Arkansas, SEC team, maybe Texas.
Right.
They looked really good when they were in the Big 12. Maybe they can't hang in the SEC though. I don't know.
Right.
I guess those are some of the kind of biggest takeaways on for me, I guess. And I don't know. This is not really a huge takeaway, but Florida State lost to who was it?
Jacksonville State.
Yeah, which kind of makes Notre Dame look even worse, combined with Notre Dame's struggle with Toledo. So,
yes, it does. Yeah, no, that's a good point. That's a good point. Yeah, Jacksonville State scored a touchdown on the last play of the game on a long pass to beat Florida State. And then, another interesting point. I saw last night on NFL Network that they're going to do one of those. I forget what they called it. Football Life series on Nick Saban. Of course, they show some clips of what's going to come in the show and talked about some of the things he preaches and how he coaches. Alabama beat Mercer Saturday. They beat them 48-14. Now, Mercer's a team that just started football in 2012. That was their first year playing football. I think they just practiced and that year, and then they started playing a few games after that, and then eventually moved into a conference. But they're still, I think they're an FBS team or an FCS team, but they may be FBS. I'm not sure. I can check on that. But needless to say, it's a team that hasn't been around very long. Alabama played them, I think, a couple years ago, maybe, and beat them like 76 or 56 or 60-0. Alabama beat them 48-14, and you say that's a blowout, but Saban said they played a lot of young guys. But it was interesting. I read an article where after the game was over, the Mercer players were all excited. They went over to their corner of the stadium with their fans, and Saban used that kind of as emotional fuel or training fuel with his team, saying, hey, of course, he didn't say this to the media, but it was that, look, you guys better shape up because, you've got a tough schedule coming ahead. And, if you don't start taking things seriously. So I thought that was interesting how he said that to a team that is obviously head and shoulders above everybody else in college football. But I think that's what separates Alabama and Nick Saban from everybody else is that, they make sure they dot all the I's and cross all the T's.
Yeah, I think Mercer probably is 1AA. Looking at their schedule, they play teams like Chattanooga and VMI, Wofford, Stanford. I think those are 1AA schools.
Right.
But that I actually was. Well, I mean, you said they played some young guys, but 48-14 is a blowout, but it's a little closer than I thought it would be. I mean, Mercer scored 14 points.
Right, exactly. Yeah.
But like he's. I mean, Saban's going to have to say something like that. What else is he going to say after they blow out a team that's supposed to blow out? You know what I mean? Like, oh, you guys better shape up. You know.
Right.
But
Right. Exactly.
Alabama's going to be fine, obviously. I mean, the fact that we're even talking about that after they blow out a team like they're supposed to do is just kind of interesting. But
it is interesting. But I just kind of brought that up to show that that's kind of, Saban has put such a culture in that I think they don't take anything for granted.
Yeah, no, that makes sense. Yeah.
Let's talk a little bit about Tennessee. Tennessee obviously won their opening game against Bowling Green on a Thursday night to start the season. They played Pittsburgh last Saturday. It was the first of two games that they're billing as the Johnny Majors Classic, because Johnny Majors was the coach at Pitt from 1973 through 1976. He won a national championship with Pittsburgh in 1976 with Tony Dorsett, as their running back. Then he came home to Tennessee, because many of our listeners know that Johnny Majors was a running back for Tennessee in the 50s. And of course, led the resurgence of Tennessee into the mid 80s and late. Now, he struggled his first few years, but then turned the program around. So they played this game at Neyland Stadium. Next year, the two teams will meet in Pittsburgh for the second half of that classic. Tennessee is we talked about this a little bit last week. They don't have a lot of talent. They had a lot of guys transfer over the last few years. They had a lot of guys transfer after last year, after they fired Jeremy Pruitt. This new coach is installing kind of I don't want to say run and shoot, but a very fast-paced offense where I believe there's not more than about 10 seconds between plays. They try to move pretty fast, but they're struggling at quarterback. They had their starter in there. He didn't play very well. He's struggling with touch passes. He's got a strong arm, but he doesn't really know how to gear it back. They pulled him saying that he had an injury, which, nobody knows one way or the other. They brought in another quarterback, and I think you and I were watching part of it when Tennessee was down 41-27. They scored to make it 41-34. And then they held a good kickoff. They held Pittsburgh deep in their territory, stopped them on a 3-and-out. Pittsburgh had a bad punt. Tennessee took it over in Pittsburgh territory. And the first play, the quarterback throws an interception, a bad interception, where he never even saw the safety lingering right there in the middle, threw it right to him. And that was pretty much the end of the game. So, they played hard, Tennessee. They didn't make a tremendous amount of mistakes. So I think that's a win for them. But, that was the game, Pittsburgh, that I think they needed to win to have hopes to be maybe 6-6, because obviously, they're with their SEC schedule, there's not a lot of teams there that you could look at and say, hey, Tennessee can win this football game. So I guess the question I want to ask you, really is, from a defensive player's perspective, which, you played defense all your life. And again, a defensive player is never going to say this, but how is it deflating when you're trying to come back, you hold the team to 3-and-out, and on the first play, your offense throws an interception. As you go back in on defense, do you think that deflates the defenders at all, or do you go out there with the same level of intensity?
I think you go out with the same level of intensity, like, you always would, regardless of the circumstances, I mean?
Right.
Yeah, I think it's a little deflating initially. You have that feeling on the side, like, here we go, you got to run right back on the field. But when you get out there, if anything, it's almost like you have a little bit of that feeling of like, in other words, the whatever anger, whatever you're feeling about what the offense just did, you can use that as fuel, on defense, and really,
right.
It's like, the game's on us now. Let's take it over. You know what I mean?
Right.
Type of feeling. So I don't think it makes the defense play any worse if that's kind of what you're asking.
Yeah, maybe I asked it wrong. I guess you hit it on the head is what I was looking for. Exactly what you said is that you go out there with that attitude. Okay, it's on us. We've got to do it again.
Yeah, like we almost like, okay, we're not going to get any help here. It's on us. We're going to win the game.
Right.
So it kind of gives you an extra fuel a little bit, but it is deflating initially when the interception or something like that happens initially. Yeah.
Right.
But yeah, would you agree with that? I mean, you obviously
I agree.
played at a at a much higher level than I did.
No, I agree with that. I think that's a fair assessment, and it's kind of tough on a defense when that happens. But yeah, that's kind of Tennessee's issue this year is, they're going to struggle like that because it's going to take them some time. And I just think that, their fans have to kind of, as much as I hate to say it, you kind of have to live with that. And I think this week they'll get healthy again. They play Tennessee Tech this weekend. That should be a team beat. So they'll be 2-1.
I think we talked about this a little before the Pitt game. Didn't you say Pitt's probably their best non-conference opponent, right?
Yeah, without a doubt. Yeah.
So I'm looking at their schedule here. Okay, so the 1-1, they're going to beat Tennessee Tech, right?
Right.
They'll be 2-1.
Then
they play at Florida. That'd be a tough game, obviously.
That's a loss, right?
Yeah. At Missouri. I don't know much about Missouri this year.
Could be a win. Okay.
All right. So that's maybe 3 wins there. Then they play South Carolina, which at home
could be, but again, could be tough. We'll say it's a loss right now. It's 3-3. They'll probably. I think they could beat either Missouri or South Carolina. So let's call them 3-3 at that point.
All right. Then they have Ole Miss in Knoxville,
and they're going to lose that one.
Okay. 3-4. Then they're at Alabama. They'll lose that one.
3-5.
Then they're at Kentucky. They could beat Kentucky, I think.
They could beat Kentucky. They're going to have to play well, but let's call it a win. 4-5.
All right. Then they play Georgia at home. They'll lose that probably.
4-6.
Then they play South Alabama at home. They should win that.
5-6.
And then they got Vanderbilt. So yeah, I think they can still make a bowl.
Yeah, they can. Yeah, they can do 6-6. I think, but as I just said, they're going to have to beat either Missouri or South Carolina, at least one of those.
Yeah.
And they're going to have to beat Kentucky. So if they can do that, I think they could be 6-6. Now they cannot afford to lose 2 of those 3. In other words, if they lose to both Missouri and South Carolina, beat Kentucky, or beat Missouri, lose to South Carolina, Kentucky. So I think right now they're teetering on 6-6, 5-7.
Yeah, I think after they play, of course, Tennessee Tech next week. Then after that, they got Florida, Missouri, South Carolina. If they lose all 3 of those, it's pretty much over.
Yeah, it is. And again, I want to tell our Tennessee listeners, I've said this to many of my friends who have talked to me and because a lot of my friends, don't really like Notre Dame very well. And I can understand that. That's okay with me. But I tell them I like Tennessee. And I think it's good for college football for Tennessee to be a strong program. Tennessee has a tremendous amount of tradition. But I tell all of them, look, they're in probably the best, probably without a doubt, the best conference in America. You've got Alabama, Georgia, Florida, Auburn, LSU. I mean, you've got Texas A&M, who's in the top 10. I mean, you've got some teams in there that are just tremendous football teams. And when you have a team like Tennessee right now that has gone through 4 coaches in the last 10 years, have lost talent through transfers, have lost talent through suspensions or whatever, it's going to take a coach probably 5 or 6 years to really build that program, to be able to recruit and build that program to the level that they need it to be. And unfortunately, and I'm sure most fan bases are like this, when you start to lose, right away they want to look for the quick fix. And the quickest fix is what? Change the coach, right? Well, in the NFL, that works a little bit easier because you've got the same players the next year. They can't transfer or leave. So maybe a different coach can make a difference. But in college, when you change a coach, you're going to have guys leave the program. You're going to have a coach come in wanting to recruit his own guys. So that's going to create a little upheaval. I remember I'll give them a story. When I got to Notre Dame, I was a freshman. Dan Devine was the head coach. That was his first year. Most of the team was Ara Parsegan players, and Ara Parsegan had a great run at Notre Dame, 2 national championships in 11 years. Dan Devine did not like the players from Ara Parsegan, and he alienated the team because the guys he brought in that first year, he was kind of leaning towards, and the ones that were there from Parsegan, he kind of tried to put in the back burner. That caused a little dissension on the team. The players were upset. We didn't play very well. So my point is that what's going to happen is, you struggle with that as well when a new coach comes in. So I say all that to say, you've got to give a coach time, and you may struggle right away. I mean, it may take 2, 3, 4 years before you start to see it turn around. But unfortunately, when you're bereft of talent like Tennessee is, it takes a while to build it back. So it's going to take some.
And that's a good point. Even if you bring in a new coach who is a better coach, it's gonna create some turmoil, at least initially, just because you have a coaching change. You know what I mean?
Right.
Those reasons that you said. And then also, I think you're right about Tennessee's, been in the SEC pretty much forever, right? So I think they don't. Maybe I think a lot of fans don't really think of that. Like, imagine if Tennessee was one of these teams like Texas A&M that just came to the SEC a couple years ago. I think they would have a lot more kind of realistic expectations of what to expect. You know what I mean?
Right.
Being in the SEC. But I think it is important to take a step back and remember that, hey, we're in the absolute best conference in football, right?
Right.
Let's let's remember that. You know what I mean? So if Tennessee was in like the ACC or some of these other conferences, I think they'd be a lot better, obviously. So
Sure.
I think that's important to remember. That's an excellent point.
Yeah. No, there's no question about that. And even if you brought Nick Saban into Tennessee right now, okay, let's remember when Nick Saban took over Alabama in 2007, he was 8-5 the first year, okay, and then of course in 2008 he was better, and then in 2009 they won the national championship. Now it took him 3 years, but Alabama had a lot of talent on that football team, okay, and if he came to Tennessee, I'm going to tell you right now, it would take him 3 years to turn it around. Now, he would turn it around quicker than probably some other coaches because of his pedigree and his resume, but it's not going to happen immediately because, first of all, there's no talent there. And second of all, little talent. He's got to recruit. He's got to build it up. So look at it. Even if you brought in a Nick Saban, you're looking at 3 years, and anybody less than a Nick Saban, you're probably looking at 4 or 5. So it's going to take a while.
Yeah, and the problem is they're obviously always getting people less than Nick Saban, and they're not giving them 4 or 5. So it's like, what are you really doing?
That's right. That's exactly right. I mean, there's no question. Touch on a couple other things. I was glad to see Vanderbilt come back and win. They beat Colorado State at Colorado State. Vanderbilt took a lot of heat for losing to. I think they lost to East Tennessee State, if I'm not mistaken, the first week of the season.
I think that's right.
Yeah, the team that Tennessee plays this coming week. So good kudos to Vanderbilt
I think Tennessee plays Tennessee Tech. Right?
That's right.
Yeah.
That's right. Right. That's right. And Vanderbilt played East Tennessee State. That's right. So good for Vanderbilt to come back. LSU, Coach Orgeron, go Tigers. He kind of got it back on track. Of course, they beat McNeese State, but at least that'll soothe the wounds of the LSU fans. They won that game 34-7. So LSU at least has another week to kind of lick their wounds a little bit. Michigan with a big win at home against Washington. That win, some of the luster off that win was taken off by the fact that Washington lost to Montana the first week. So it looks like Washington is not as good as everybody thought they were to start the season. Kentucky beat Missouri 35-28. So we were just talking about those two teams with Tennessee. So that kind of tells you that those two teams are probably similar. Ole Miss is ranked 20th. They beat Austin Peay 54-17. They beat Louisville the first week. And then Louisville turned around this week with a big win. Louisville beat Eastern Kentucky 30-3. So Ole Miss is for real, and I think Tennessee is going to struggle a little bit with them. Mississippi State beat North Carolina State 24-10, and then we talked about Arkansas pummeling Texas 40-21, which is not a good sign for Texas, not only for this year and their new coach, but also for the portents of them joining the SEC in a few years. So again, like I said, lots of games that week were mostly games against teams that you would consider to be inferior to the opposition that they played at their home. So let's look at this week coming up. We talked about the top 20. We talked a little bit about Tennessee and some of these other teams. We get back on track with some good games this week. Miami of Florida, ranked 24th, takes on Michigan State. Michigan State's not quite really what they used to be. Coastal Carolina, that's an interesting team. Josh Caraway, a friend of the podcast, we've had him on a couple times before. They're 2-0, ranked 16th in the country. They go to Buffalo to play Buffalo this week, and Coastal Carolina looks like they're going to be another team this year that's going to maybe vie for a playoff spot. They're probably not going to get it, but they're going to be back up there again. Cincinnati, a future Notre Dame opponent, goes to Indiana. Indiana gave Ohio State all they wanted week one. That's an interesting game because Indiana, I guess now that Ohio State lost at home to Oregon, you start wondering, is Ohio State quite as strong as everybody thought they were, or is Indiana better than people thought they were? So that'll be an interesting game that's coming up. Pittsburgh, after they beat Tennessee, will take on Western Michigan. Chattanooga is at Kentucky. which will be an interesting game. Nebraska and Oklahoma. Now, there's one I want to talk a little bit about. Nebraska is at number 3 Oklahoma this Saturday. Back in the day when I was in high school, the Nebraska-Oklahoma game used to be one of the biggest games in college football. Both teams were always ranked in the top 5. You just had two tremendous football teams. You had Barry Switzer coaching Oklahoma. I can't remember off the top of my head who the Nebraska, Tom Osborne. That's right. Tom Osborne was the coach of Nebraska. 2 storied programs. That game has lost a lot of luster over the years. Oklahoma has stayed pretty good. Nebraska has fallen off quite a bit over the last 20 years. Scott Frost is the coach at Nebraska. Many people might remember he was also the coach at Central Florida when they went undefeated a few years ago. Scott Frost was also a quarterback on the Nebraska team back many years ago. So many people thought that, he would come marching home and take his alma mater to greater heights, but they have struggled quite a bit. But that's still a big football game, Nebraska at Oklahoma, and I'm looking forward to that one. Any thoughts on that one, Nathan?
Well, Oklahoma looks like they're favored by 22 points.
They are.
I guess for the reasons that you discussed of the history of the matchup, I think it would be an interesting one. But is it supposed to be a good game? I don't think it will be, right?
It's not supposed to be, yeah. But I think just the
matchup.
The matchup and the tradition.
Yeah,
it should make.
Yeah, but you would agree you don't think it's going to be close, or do you think it would be kind of close?
I don't think it's going to be close, but you just never know with 2 rivalry teams like that. But I bring up that game because I remember many of our listeners obviously don't remember this, but back in 1971, both these teams played on Thanksgiving Day, and Nebraska was ranked number 1. Oklahoma was ranked number 2. It was billed as the game of the century. Of course, many games have been billed as that since then. But Nebraska had the Heisman Trophy winner, Johnny Rodgers. Oklahoma had a tremendous football team. Nebraska ended up winning that game 35-31, but it was just a tremendous football game. I remember watching it on Thanksgiving Day. So lots of tradition between Nebraska and Oklahoma. But it's kind of lost a lot of its luster, kind of like the Oklahoma-Texas game has lost over the years as well.
The Cincinnati game, I think, will be interesting, like for the reasons you discussed. It looks like Cincinnati's favored by 4 points, so that'll probably be a close game. And do you think Cincinnati is going to be a team that, like last year, is up there at the end of the season again, talking about playoffs? Or do you think they'll slip up and lose a game at some point this year?
Yeah.
Do you think, I don't know if you've been following them in the first 2 weeks as opposed to some of these other teams, but what are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I've been following them a little bit only because they're a Notre Dame opponent, and they won a big game week 1. They struggled a little bit with Murray State last week and then pulled away. I think Cincinnati's as good as their build. I think they're as good as last year. Of course they lost some players too, but more guys came in. I think Cincinnati's going to be a team to be reckoned with. I don't know that they're going to be fighting for a playoff spot. I don't know what their schedule is off the top of my head. But I do think that they're a pretty good football team, and I think Notre Dame's going to have all they want from them when Cincinnati comes into South Bend in a few weeks.
Yeah, Cincinnati, I'm looking at their schedule here. After they play Indiana, they have Notre Dame right after that.
Right.
And then they have, we'll go. And then they have, they play Temple, UCF, Navy, Tulane, right. Tulsa, South Florida, SMU, East Carolina. So I would think that these couple of games that have coming up here, Indiana, Notre Dame, would be their best chances to lose a game.
Yes, it will. But I think But I think on the flip side of that, if they beat Indiana at Indiana and they beat Notre Dame at Notre Dame, they're going to be right up there because I don't think anybody else has a chance to beat them unless they slip up.
Right. Yeah. I agree. They played Tulane, which played Oklahoma close, but I don't know what the deal was. I don't know if Tulane's like for real good or if that was just like Oklahoma was playing bad. Or was it Oklahoma that played close? Yeah, I think it was.
Yes.
Interesting. So what other games you want to discuss?
Well, yeah, I think the marquee matchup of the weekend is obviously number 1 Alabama at number 11 Florida. That's going to be the game of the weekend. Alabama's favored by 14.5. I think Alabama wins this game. I think it's going to be close. I'm not sure that I shouldn't say it that way. I think Alabama's going to win the football game. I'm not sure by how much. We really don't know much about Florida just yet. They haven't really played anybody. Of course, Alabama, you could argue, hasn't either, but they did beat Miami and Florida. But that's going to be obviously the key game of the week. If Florida has any hopes at all of winning the SEC, I think they're going to have to beat Alabama, because more than likely, if they win the East, they're going to play Alabama again. So that's going to be the game that I think everybody's going to look at as the key game. I think the other game of the weekend that I think is going to be probably another marquee game is number 22 Auburn at number 10 Penn State. Penn State beat Wisconsin opening week. They did win last week over, a team that they should have beaten. Auburn, again, big win last week over an FCS team. They are 2-0. Penn State's going to have whiteout conditions. It's again, college football stadiums are full this year as opposed to last year. Penn State is noted for their whiteout, where everybody in the stands wears white. And I think that's going to be a really good game. It's going to tell us a lot about Penn State more than it's going to tell us about Auburn, because I think anytime these teams from the Big Ten play SEC teams, if they can hang with them and even beat them, I think that tells you a lot about what kind of team they are. Would you agree with that? Yeah,
that's a good point. That would be an interesting game at night at Penn State. Another game that I was looking at, Iowa's ranked number 5 right now.
Right.
They play Kent, so they're going to be 3-0 after this week, basically.
Right.
Right. Are they or Kent State? Excuse me. Do you think Iowa is going to hang up in the top 5, top 3 coming to the end of the season? Or do you think that's the team that you want to see up there at weeks from now? Yeah, they beat Indiana 34-6 week 1. Indiana was 17th and Iowa was 18th at that time. They beat number 9 Iowa State last week, 27-17. Indiana was number 10 at that time. Now they moved up to number 5.
Right. Well, again, I don't know what Iowa's schedule is. They have to play Penn State this year, Ohio State this year.
They have to play. Yeah, they have to play. Some of the bigger games, it looks like, will be Penn State. They have Penn State at home though.
Right.
They play Wisconsin at Wisconsin.
Right.
And then they don't play Ohio State yet. So.
Yeah. Yeah. No, I think they have a chance to run the table. I think they're a pretty good football team. I think, again, anytime we talk about these teams like Iowa or Penn State or Oklahoma or, any of these teams, I think you always have to talk about them in the shadow of the SEC, right? I mean, because, you can look at a team that's in the top 5, you can look at a team that maybe even makes the playoff, but how good there are good football teams, but again, take Penn State. Like I said, if they beat Auburn at home, then we got to start looking at Penn State a little bit, because I don't care who you are in the SEC, whether you're Texas A&M, Auburn, LSU, Georgia, Florida, Alabama, Texas A&M. If you can beat those teams, you're a pretty good football team, because those teams are excellent football teams playing in the Southeastern Conference. So we'll learn a lot about Iowa when they play Penn State, and of course when they go to Wisconsin. But I think they're a good football team. I just don't really know how good right now, because it's still early in the season. And again, I'm going to say the same thing I said last week. It really, for example, Washington was ranked 20th going into the season. Well, they're obviously not very good. They lost to Montana, okay, and then they lost to Michigan. So ranking teams, and I know why they do it. You got to have it for TV and media, right? Hey, today, number 1 Alabama takes on number 14 Miami. Well, Miami wasn't the 14th best team in the country, okay? And it's hard to really – it'd be great if we could play 3 or 4 weeks and then rank teams, because then we'll know really how good these teams are. Right now, we really don't, because you're ranking them to start the season based on something they did last year or based on players you think are going to be good. So that's why I think these first 2 or 3 weeks are kind of flush out weeks, where we kind of see, okay, these teams are what we thought they were. These teams are not as good as we thought they were, or, hey, here's a few teams that are better than we thought they were. So, it's kind of early to kind of look at these rankings and make judgments off that.
Well, and going off of that, I mean, are we sure that Auburn, aside from the fact they're an SEC team and they're historically pretty good, are we sure that Penn State's going to have a whole lot of trouble with them? Auburn beat Akron in the first week, then they beat Alabama State. They blew those teams out, scored over 60 points each of those games like they're supposed to do. But I guess, well, like you said, anytime it's an SEC team and they are 2-0,
Right.
I guess it's going to be difficult. But I mean, Penn State's favored by 6 points. They're at home, so maybe 3 points for home. So maybe they think they're about 3 points better than Auburn, I guess.
Right.
But yeah, that's an interesting game. I'm looking forward to seeing how that goes. So
Yeah. Yeah. And, you take North Carolina, for example. North Carolina is ranked 21st right now. They play Virginia this week. They were ranked in the top 15 going into the season, lost to Virginia Tech. So a lot of that was based on last year. North Carolina was a very strong team here. But, again, it's hard to tell exactly how good a team is coming into the next year. I'll tell you another interesting game, which most people aren't going to be spending a lot of time on, is Stanford at Vanderbilt. And the reason I bring that game up is Stanford is not a very good football team this year. They lost week one pretty badly to a team that they probably had a chance to beat. They did beat Southern Cal last weekend, 42-28, which led to the firing of Southern Cal's coach, Clay Helton. Vanderbilt is 1-1 right now, but those are two teams, both high academic standards, similar teams from an academic standpoint. Stanford's had the better of it the last 20 years or so as far as football goes, but that's going to be an interesting game, I think, at Vanderbilt to see which of those teams, who wins the academic bowl, I guess is the way maybe the way I would put it. So we'll see with that one. Outside of that, I think some of the other games, you got number 19 Arizona State at number 23 Brigham Young, but again, who knows how good those teams are and whether those rankings are really warranted. So we'll see. But all in all, it was a pretty good week in college football. As I said, we're starting to see some of the dust settle. I think this coming week and then next week, after the first 4 weeks of the season, when you and I get together again to talk college football, I think then we're going to have a really good idea of where these teams are. Because if I go back to the rankings, I think we're going to see Alabama and Georgia kind of stay where they are. I think Oklahoma will be there. Oregon is a team that, I want to see what they do here going forward. Big win over Ohio State. Did they let down? Did they slip up and get beat by a team that shouldn't beat them? We'll find out. Iowa, as we just talked about, I think will be there. Clemson is 6. Clemson's going to end up 11-1. I think they're going to be in the talk for a playoff. Texas A&M had a scare. We're going to see if they can beat Alabama, but I think they're going to be up there. Cincinnati, again, we don't know. Ohio State, I think they're going to be fine, but again, we just don't know right now. Penn State, we don't know. Florida, can they beat Alabama? Can they hang with Alabama? We don't know. Notre Dame, I think we're going to find out a lot about Notre Dame over the next 3 weeks. They play Purdue this week at home, another team that they should beat, but we thought they were going to beat Toledo pretty handily. So we don't know. And then they play Wisconsin or Cincinnati and Wisconsin. So if Notre Dame comes out of the next 3 weeks 5-0, hey, Notre Dame is going to be a top 10 team, going to be there. If they don't, they're just going to be an average football team. UCLA has looked like they've improved. They're number 13. But again, in another couple of weeks, we'll probably know more about them. So I say all that to say that I think when you and I get together again 2 weeks from now, we're going to know a lot more about some of these teams.
Yeah, and I hate to say it about Notre Dame, but I don't know if they want to be up there late in the season, because if they make the playoffs, I think I guess if they end up making the playoffs, they will have had to improve some, from now to that point, because they're going to have to win all their rest of their games. But I just think it's going to be ugly if they're in the playoffs this year with the way they've played in 2 weeks.
I agree. Yeah, I agree with you 100%. But I really believe if you look at some of those teams that are ahead of them, Alabama's not going to lose. Georgia's probably not going to lose. Oklahoma might lose, but who knows? I guess what I'm trying to say is that even if Notre Dame runs the table, looking at them, it's not going to be an impressive running of the table, if you know. Yeah. So I think even if they go undefeated, they could be on the outside looking in, which for me, I'm fine with that, because I agree with you 100%. Right now, this Notre Dame team is nowhere near what they were last year or what they were in 2018. And part of the reason is their quarterback. They have got to, Ian Book, I said this to many people and they laughed at me. Ian Book ended up the winningest quarterback in Notre Dame history when you look at number of wins. And he reminded me a lot of Joe Montana. Now, obviously Joe Montana, he's not Joe Montana, but he reminded me of him in college, where he was a leader. He could run, he could throw. It just seemed like when he was in the game, Notre Dame had a spark. And I think this guy that they've got now, Jack Cohn, great kid, good quarterback, good pocket quarterback. But obviously they needed to bring in their freshman, number 12, Buckner, to add some excitement to the offense, because he could run a little bit with their pass run offense. And I think that's what they're going to need. They're going to need that spark at quarterback to open up their running game and keep defenses on their heels. So we'll see. I mean, I think this is supposed to be Notre Dame's down year from a standpoint of talent. I think next year you're going to see a Notre Dame team that probably will compete for the top 4 in the playoff spot. So we'll see. But anyway, a good week of college football. We've enjoyed bringing you the recap. Make sure you park yourself in front of your TV and watch a lot of these games this week. It's going to be a lot of fun. And then Nathan and I will get back together next week to talk about week 3. Any final thoughts, Nathan?
No, that about does it.
Okay, thanks for listening to the Press Box Podcast. Remember, @PressBoxPod is our Twitter account. The Press Box Podcast YouTube channel is something that you definitely want to check out. Nathan's done a lot of great work with that. And, of course, our Instagram page @PressBoxPod. So that's college football for week 2. Week 3 coming up, and we'll see you again next time on the Press Box Podcast.